It's also my honor this morning to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Timothy Webb, who's the Commissioner of Education in Tennessee. I'm going to keep the introduction a little informal in the sense that when I first met Commissioner Webb, he told me a story. And it was a story of a student that he had in his classroom who, in English class, not in Commissioner Webb's class, in English class, was asked to write, where would you want to be immediately before you had to face death? And it was kind of an odd assignment, and the student wrote about Dr. Webb. The English teacher came into him, said, Dr. Webb, you got to hear this. He said, Clint wrote about you. Dr. Webb says, he never comes to class on time. He doesn't seem to be listening all that much. I wonder what it is. So the next class period, Dr. Webb says, Clint, why'd you write about me? Why would you want to be with me right before you die? And Clint looks at him and goes, Dr. Webb, because your class is like an eternity. I will say, every time I've listened to Dr. Webb and had the pleasure of listening to his talks, to hearing his stories, to learning about the great work he has done here in Tennessee and throughout his career, it never feels like an eternity. I wish it was, because we could keep on listening. Commissioner Webb holds multiple degrees. He received his associate degree from Columbia State Community College, a bachelor's degree from Regents College, a master's in educational leadership from Middle Tennessee State University, and a doctorate in education from Nova Southern University. The one thing I did notice, Dr. Webb, there wasn't Vanderbilt on here. We can work on this together. Yeah. Yeah. The thing about Dr. Webb, too, is his commitment to Tennessee education, not only to its students, to its children, to the parents of Tennessee, but to the teachers and the educators. After Tennessee was awarded Race to the Top, $501 million to reform the Tennessee education school system, the commissioner said to me, he goes, the one thing we did in our application is we put teachers, and we put the children at the center of everything we did. And if you go back and read the short document, it's very clear. Teachers, the educators, and the children were at the center of every reform that was proposed, and it speaks to the commissioner's vision. So without further ado, I will not tell any more jokes, but it is wonderful to have you here today, and thank you for making the time. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Springer. I appreciate you sharing that. That's exactly why that I wound up in administration. My principal advised me that I probably didn't need to be in the classroom much longer after that. This morning I got up at 4. On behalf of Governor Bredesen and the Department of Education, I welcome you to Tennessee, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. There's no more exciting topic to discuss than effective educators. This morning I got up at 4 o'clock because I had a 5:30 call-in show that was going to be taped, and that one went fine because it was taped. We kind of controlled the environment. 6:30, though, we had a call-in show out of East Tennessee that wasn't taped. It was live. And I'm on there being bold and innovative and, saying all the great things that I'm supposed to say. And then it came time for call-in. I didn't know we were going to do call-in, but I found out the hard way. So Don calls in. And Don says, sadly enough, he's right. Don says, I am sick. I've been listening to this nonsense for 15 or 20 minutes, this guy talk, and dance around all the topics and all the issues. He's known we've had a problem. Let me back up. He knows we had a problem for a long time in this state, and he hadn't done a thing about it. He ought to be fired. I don't think he knew that I was going to get a chance to rebut on the other end. He ought to be fired. If he was in corporate America, he wouldn't last 30 minutes. So the guy, this goes on. He goes on forever. He gets through, and the guy says, well, Commissioner Webb, it's pretty blunt, pretty much in your face. What you got to say to that? I said, well, you know what? It's his lucky day. Don, you're a lucky man, because January the 18th is my last day. And we'll bring somebody else in, and we'll try to keep this ball rolling. Hopefully we've set the stage, for the next folks to be successful. And then another guy called in because his kid didn't know his times tables in the 6th grade. Anyway, you know, I'm glad I put up all the razor blades and all the ropes before I did that call-in show, because I didn't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to put up with that nonsense. But anyway, it's a good thing. It all went well. And just kind of brings everything back to earth from time to time, and that's important. You know what? We found ourselves unexpectedly in probably one of the worst economic winters that we've ever been recently. And folks have gotten things muddled up with this whole race to the top, first to the top thing as something independent of this economic winter. And I think that it's very important for us to think about what our, as educators, economic imperative is inside of this, how we address this long-term problem of an economic winter for our country. And it can be summed up in, regardless of your partisanship, it can be summed up in words that the President said not long ago and the Secretary quoted last Wednesday when we were in D.C. trying to do some roundtable work around how we all move this thing forward for the 12 states that are there now, and then we can share those best practices and those kinds of things with everybody else. And it's this. And I had not really thought about this until he said this and just passed through it, and it just resonated in my mind since then. And it says this: those who out-educate us will out-compete us. I'll say that again. Those who out-educate us will out-compete us. And that's true whether it's system to system, county to county, state to state, or nation to nation. That is our economic imperative as educators. We can no longer allow ourselves to be out-educated. And no matter whether you're Don in Knoxville, Tennessee, or that father who wanted to know how that he's supposed to fix his child that's a 6th grader that don't know his times tables and now he can't do algebraic functions in 6th, 7th, and 8th, doesn't matter. We can't allow ourselves to be out-educated. And if you looked at our Race to the Top application, and I'm not really a person who likes to do death by PowerPoint. I'll do my best. I was told I was supposed to do this by the people who advised me for 3 months. So if I don't do it, we'll get there, but it may not be verbatim, okay? So just bear with me. But if you look at our Race to the Top application in Tennessee, you will see that it's not about programs, it's not about buying bells and whistles, but the focus is absolutely on effective leaders and effective educators. From start to finish. Massive amounts of investment, and I hate to use this term, but human capital and human capacity, if you will. That's the focus. But not just on human capacity aimed at one thing, and that's delivering student performance. Delivering on the promise that we make to our mothers and fathers all over this state and to our business community all over this state and all over this nation, that we're going to deliver the kind of workforce that you need, the kind of student that you need. And if you look at the standards and assessment piece, it's there. We believe we have the gold standard for standards and assessment. If you don't believe me, you go out and talk to Don and these parents that are getting their individual performance reports for their students who were advanced and proficient for the last 6 or 7 years and find themselves now all of a sudden basic or below. And I was in Chattanooga yesterday dealing with that very issue with the press conference with the governor around the fact that we've got to stay the course. We've got to stay the course. We're going to see massive numbers of students that are below proficient and basic. We're going to see massive numbers of schools at some point along the process move into an accountability continuum that may not have been there before, may have heretofore been considered the gold standard of public schools in Tennessee. When you move to a place where over 70% of your students fall more than 50% in proficient and advanced, that's a pretty big shift in standards and assessment. So we got that. We know what kids need to be taught, and we're going to measure against that standard. That's a tool. That's not the end all. That's a tool. Because you know what you got to have? What you got to have? You got to have an effective educator to deliver against that standard, right? Turnaround strategies. We have an achievement school district. We're going to take over schools. We're going to pull schools out of their school districts. If you don't think, again, I apologize for preaching, but that's just what I do. If you don't think that it gets exciting when you go into an urban environment and you tell them you're about to take their school and the alumni association standing in there and all the parents, it gets exciting. It's tense. And guess what happened to us this year for the first time? For the first time, we moved into rural America and started having this conversation. Now, you go out into Hohenwald, Tennessee, where I grew up, with 11,000 people, where that education system, that education enterprise is the single largest employer in the community, and you say, guess what we're going to do? We're taking Lewis County High School. Going to run it for you. Going to bring a bunch of people in here, and all you folks are gone. If you don't think you hear safeties click and chains rattle, welcome to Tennessee. The world as we know it has changed. And if we don't get this right, I believe with all of my heart, I had the privilege of getting to stand, and I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you, I had the privilege of getting to stand in the East Executive Wing and listen to the Vice President of this country, before Race to the Top was ever officially rolled out, to tell us that this was, in our profession, our moonshot. This was our moonshot. If we don't get it right, education as we know it will cease to exist, and I believe that with all my heart. I believe that with all my heart. So we can't fail. Failure is not an option for us. So turnaround strategies, taking over schools, STEM network, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, like we've never done before. Partnership with Ohio, Battelle Foundation, Oak Ridge National Labs, making sure that all of our teachers have and our students have access to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education like they've never had before, because if we do those things well, the other things can fall in place. Data systems aimed at 360-degree view of a child, so that those things that we don't know are happening to those children outside of that 6.5, 7.5 hour day that determine whether or not a teacher can even be effective, we can identify those kinds of things and let our educators know and our leaders know well in advance. For the first time, we have data sharing agreements with agencies in this state that we never dreamed would share that data. Now, do we deal with FERPA? Yeah, FERPA, HIPAA, SIPA, whatever, anything else that wants to come, anything, just personal, preference and everything else that we have to deal with. And yes, I did end that sentence in a preposition. I am trying to master the English language. I've been trying since graduation at Lewis County High School. The structure of the department is a huge piece. See, the conversation we had, and I'll get to this thing here in a minute, please bear with me. The conversation that we had, though, with the Secretary of Education and his staff last week, or week before last, was this. If you want us to race to the top, Mr. Secretary, you're going to have to race with us. And what that means is that we can't have structures of organizations. Now, that's all peripheral stuff, but it's critical. It's critical. We can't have career technical education silos, IDEA silos, Title I silos, Title III silos, all those different silos driving our organizations. We got to figure out how that all that stuff can apply to everybody. And we focus on goals and objectives, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So all of those strategies, all of the strategies I just mentioned, standards and assessments, turnaround strategies, STEM, data systems, and even the structure of the Department of Education are focused on one thing, and that's what we believe to be the single most important variable in whether or not a child is successful. Anybody want to guess? Effective teachers. Effective teachers. Because here's the story I'm going to tell you real quick. I have twin daughters, 26 years old. By the way, I have a grandson that's 14 months old. In 35 years, will be President of the United States. If you could see fit to support him, I'd appreciate it, and we are accepting resumes for vice presidential candidates and cabinet members at this time. So, but I have twin daughters, 26 years old, both are teachers. One in Macon, Georgia, one in Martin, Tennessee. And I've heard the governor say this before, and it really came home to me just when I started thinking about my own children. And I believe this, and I think it's reflected in our application. And it's reflected in what we do in Tennessee. If I had a choice, if I had had a choice in Hohenwald, Tennessee, educating in Memphis, Tennessee, where they went to school, if I'd had a choice of having the opportunity to put my two daughters in the most technologically advanced classroom in this country with a less than effective teacher. Or I could have sent them to a tent on the side of the road in Hohenwald, Tennessee, with a highly effective teacher. I would have chosen the tent. And I would choose the tent again today. So how do we get there? How do we get there? Yeah, it's time for the PowerPoint. All right. Number one is about modeling and leading, and even when it's necessary, driving a culture of performance. A laser focus on goals. Well, perhaps you're going to have a screen that says driving a culture of performance. Let me see if I can figure it. There we go. Never claimed to be a technology giant. So here's our overarching goal. All students college and career ready. And I'm not going to read these things to you. I'm just going to try to talk a little bit about them. But here's what that means to me. $500.7 million. That sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? In a $5 billion budget, it's not really a lot of money. When you start trying to divide that across 954,000 kids and 1,734 school districts, 1,734 schools and 136 school districts, it doesn't go all that far. But the one thing that if we can do anything out of Race to the Top or out of First to the Top, our overarching goal is this, and it's changing expectations for every student, that every child can be college and career ready. Now, I'm going to tell you, I was involved just recently. I'm about stories, so y'all just have to bear with me. Matt, you need to keep a clock on me, buddy, because I'll get long-winded. We may have altar call and take up offering any minute. I was actually in a place not long ago, and I was talking to a group of coaches who were mad at me because I said you can't practice basketball during the academic day anymore. We need that time. And they were just really upset. They were throwing chairs around and knocking and yelling and doing some things like that. And I was just trying to be calm and, be my kind and palavering ways, and whatever that means. And guy stood up. He's an AP English teacher. AP history teacher, excuse me. I can't pick on English teachers all day. AP history teacher. And he looked at me, and this is a true story. He said, "What's wrong with you? We've always had kids at the top, and we've always had kids at the bottom, and most of the kids are in the middle, and that's the way it's always going to be. What's wrong with you talking about everybody being successful, all these kids having high expectations? What's wrong with you? Come on!" And he looked at me just like, that was the actual tone of the conversation. So the first thing I did was looked at his principal, and I said, "Is he tenured?" And he said yes, and I said, "Okay, so let me talk to you." So we started having a conversation about high expectations. But that's a true story, but it's actually where we're trying to move from, if you will, to a place of high expectations for every child in our great state, regardless of whether they're in a hamlet, and I don't have a clue what a hamlet is. My public information officer put that in there, and I looked at her yesterday and I said, "Where do we have hamlets in Tennessee? You expect me to talk about that?" And she tried to describe it to me, and I still don't know what it is. I think it's something like Hampshire, Tennessee, maybe, or Gordonsburg, some little place on the side of the road that's unincorporated, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, from the hamlet to Memphis, all right, high expectations for everybody. So here's what we're talking about. Increased graduation rates. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth in a moment. College enrollment success, proficiency on state and national assessments. You know what? Here's the challenge that we have. And we're all in the same boat, most of us. I'm a little tired of Massachusetts, but otherwise, we're all in the same boat. I love you, though. If you're from Massachusetts, I love you with all my heart. And I appreciate all you've done. Mitch Chester's a great guy. Anyway, when we looked at our state assessments, Tennessee ranked in the nation, if you don't believe me, ask Bill Daggett. Tennessee ranked in the nation first, second, and third in proficiency rates, proficiency and advanced rates in mathematics and English language arts on our state assessments. But then guess where we found ourselves on national assessments? 42nd, 46th, 49th. So that's what started this whole conversation around standards and assessments for us a couple of 3 years ago when we got an F for truth in advertising. Decreasing or eliminating achievement gaps, and as what we're here to talk about today, improving teacher effectiveness and support. Now this is a busy slide, but here's what I want to focus on. We're talking about delivering. See, we thought we had it made when we won Race to the Top. We thought we were 90% done. And then some guy rolled in and said, no, you're only 10% done. You've got 90% of the work left to do. And that's where we find ourselves. But we have to deliver on the promise of student performance. We have to. And I want to point to that column labeled ambition right there. First of all, we do believe, but we also have to be the unreasonable voice that challenges and asks tough questions. Focusing on our goals, communicating. As we talked with the other 11 states the other day, the one point that kept coming back home was communication, and how we communicate about what we're trying to accomplish for everybody. Gentle pressure, and I think that last column, how do we make the change stick? Because I'll be honest with you, I think John Q. Public is about tired of fads. And see, that's one of the things that scares me the most, is how long will the public allow us to have before they start to see market results from all the work that we're doing now around teacher effectiveness and all that. By the way, there'll be a rebate for this portion of the conference for you, because we're not talking a whole lot about teacher effectiveness. We're talking about other stuff in general. But if you want a rebate, just talk to Matt. I'm sure he'll make that happen for you. And how do we deliver? We've got to be very clear about what our aspirations are. Looking at past and present performance, I'll talk about that in a moment, and understanding drivers, setting targets, and then monitoring. Now, here's where we are. Here's where we are as an agency. And remember, I talked about that structure being critically important and breaking down those silos and making sure that everybody understands. See, we have traditionally been, and all SEAs are, I would argue, we may be able to debate that, but I would argue that all SEAs, state education agencies, have traditionally been compliance-oriented, because that's the nature of our business, making sure you spend your money the right way and you do all the things you say you're going to do in your plans. Well, our job now is to transform to delivery orientation, move away from that monitoring and compliance all the time. Now, we still have that mission to do, because OMB, OIG, all those people are not going away. They're going to expect that accountability to be maintained. However, our job is to deliver student performance, to move away from just making data available to people, because what do? Anybody have a guess about what the institutionalization and access and utilization of data in the average school across the country is when it's made available to them? 14 to 20%. Moving away from data access to data utilization and improving instruction. The next piece is critically important for us. It's critically important to our teacher evaluation process in evaluating effective educators, and that's this idea of not having assessment as an autopsy, but beginning to look at benchmark and interim assessments. And just, oh, by the way, can I do a poll? Does anybody here know what a benchmark or an interim assessment is? We really need to figure out how to standardize some of this language, as we move forward in this process. But using assessments as whatever you call it, it doesn't matter to me, whatever you call it, using assessments as a diagnostic tool as opposed to an autopsy report. Critical. And then moving away from highly qualified teachers and house options and all those kinds of things to looking at, is this teacher truly effective, and how do we measure that? Which will result in our students being college and career ready. Now, this is a painful piece for us right now. We are deeply engaged in this. You see, most state agencies, you have assistant commissioner for career technical education, assistant commissioner for IDEA, special ed, and all that. We're moving away from that. This is the way we're organizing. We're going to focus on school readiness, birth to 8, early childhood education. We're going to focus on college and career readiness. all those things that help us get ready for being successful after high school, and then post-secondary access and success. So our primary goals moving forward are going to be focusing on such things as third grade TCAP, our state assessment, and fourth grade NAEP literacy, where we are there. Eighth grade NAEP, math, seventh grade TCAP, and those kinds of things. And here's what I want to talk to you about with this idea of graduation rate. So if you look at our numbers, from 2004 until 2009, we increased our graduation rates by 83.2%. It's pretty good, huh? Not good enough. It's pretty good. We were proud about that. We were really, we were strutting around here, feeling pretty good. Then we dug in. Look at that orange column. Our graduation rates have gone up. Listen to that. Our graduation rates have gone up. But look at what happened at the other side of that, the piece we quit looking at. Our dropout rates went up. So we started saying, okay, we've got to look at more than just graduation rates. We started to see that we really have done what we were expected to do under No Child Left Behind. We were actually increasing the number of students who were getting regular diplomas. If you see that blue column there, that light blue column, that's regular diplomas. It's been going up repeatedly over the years. But look at that green number. We've also been increasing the number of special education diplomas. Decreasing the number of special education diplomas, which means we've really focused hard on getting more high school special education students in general education courses and providing some support for them, which is what we're supposed to be doing. So our graduation rates have gone up, but so have our dropout rates. So really trying to focus on not just looking at those summative numbers like proficient in math, 8th grade, proficient in math or in literacy, 3rd grade or 4th grade, and graduation rates, but starting to really dig into what are the leading indicators. We call those lagging indicators. What are the leading indicators? How many students in the 9th grade are on track to graduate under our new high school redesign process? How many students are meeting attendance benchmarks in the 9th and 10th grade? All of those kinds of things that can let us look periodically, benchmark, if you will, look at the kinds of things that need to be looked at to see if we are truly serving our students and making possible all students college and career ready by the time this 4 years is over. And the one thing that we said was we're going to stop looking at gross percentages. If we look at this year's 8th grade students, how many more of those students how many more students do we need to physically walk across that stage with a college career ready diploma to meet our benchmarks? 5,545 more students need to walk across that stage this year's 8th graders than would have done so under our current situation. 10,664 students need to be more proficient in math. 7,820 students need to be more proficient in reading. And look at those numbers underneath. 9,500 of that 10,000 are economically disadvantaged. 7,700 of that 7,800 are economically disadvantaged. By taking the data to this level, we can provide the tools that we need to provide for our educators to be truly effective and to really make the interventions, accomplish the interventions that we need to accomplish as we move forward. So looking at how do we focus on performance is our goal as we move forward. And here's what we did. And I wouldn't mind having a conversation with you about this. What we did was to say these are our strategies to how we're going to get those 5,500 students across that stage. An early warning data system, we talked about that. Effective student interventions, turnaround, teacher recruitment, teacher leader evaluation. And we said, as we roll these things out each year, how many more students do we think of that 5,500 we can actually get to graduate each of these years? And you can see we got to that aggregate point. Now, this is totally subjective, but it was a process for our agency to sit down and begin to analyze, number one, what's the problem, what's the target, and then what are the strategies, and what do we mean each year for those strategies? How do we get there? This was a very effective exercise for our agency. It may not be right. It's a dynamic chart, and it's going to change over time. But for the first time, we started thinking about quantifying every year what those targets have to be to ensure performance, to drive toward a culture of performance. I'm not sure I agree with all these numbers, but at least we got people talking about it and thinking about it and moving forward with it. I don't know why we have this in here. I looked at that and I said, why is that chart in there? It's just red and green and yellow. But apparently it helps some people. It doesn't help me. So if it helps you, I'm proud to show you this is a chart we're going to use. And it'll be red and green based on where we are in each one of the quarters of the year. And, you know, it'll be nice. So if you want to borrow it, you can. So, again, I go back, as I'm wrapping up, I go back to that first bullet. Everything else inside of our application, everything that we're doing, everything that I've talked about here today is aimed at one thing, and that's at making sure that every child, and this is a huge lift, ladies and gentlemen, based on evaluating effective educators, but here's our vision, that every child that enters our system, every child, regardless of whether they come from Uganda and walk into a formal classroom for the first time they've ever done at Glencliff High School in Nashville, or Mexico, or Mississippi, or Kentucky, or California, it doesn't matter, or they're just homegrown. And they walk into our system, that every child from the day they access our system in Tennessee, everything that we've talked about is aimed at making sure they have an effective educator, a highly effective educator, and a great school leader at every point of engagement along that education continuum, whatever it looks like, whether it looks like the industrial model in which we operate today, or whether it looks like something else going forward, that they have the opportunity to engage in an effective educator, with an effective educator and a great school leader at every point along that continuum. If we do that, we have driven to a culture of performance. And our students will graduate college and career ready and be equipped with the tools that they need to be successful wherever they live and wherever they want to go. And I wrap up with this last statement, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. If I don't do anything else when I leave here, I want to make sure that every child that's under my watch, because see, I had the benefit, neither one of my parents even went to high school. But somebody, Nina Bennett, Estelle Harwood, Wayne Davis, somebody in that rural school system in Hornwall, Tennessee, had high expectations. And they believed in me. And they made it possible, whether they want to believe it or not, they made it possible for me to not just have to stand on the sideline because I grew up at 38462, not just stand on the sideline and see the American dream. They made it possible for me to get to live the American dream. And if I get to do anything else the rest of my life, that's my life's mission. And the only way we can do that is to make sure that every child has an effective educator. Thank you. Questions, comments? If your name's Don and you're from Knoxville, I'm sorry if I made you mad early this morning. Not, Matt, I don't know who to turn it over to. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to be with you. And hope you have a great rest of the conference. I'm heading off over to, I got a question here. Heading off over to the lead conference here in just a minute.
Commissioner Chris Connell, I'm an education writer. Where does teacher merit pay fit into this? They're releasing a big study here about merit pay in Nashville.
I think it's important for us to realize that that is one tool in the toolbox. I think it's important for us to try to figure out how we're going to get down that path. It's a scary path. I'm going to back up just for a second. Did you say Chris is your name? Chris, I'm going to back up just for a second. I think one of the challenges that we as leaders in education are going to have to figure out is how to get down that path without any more resources. That's a huge challenge. I mean, it's so all well and good for us to know how to get there, but to be able to fund it and resources is a different story. And I think that's going to have cause conversations to take place among leadership to say that if 80 to 92% of the dollars that we're spending right now in our public education budgets are spent in salary and benefits, we're going to have to repurpose some of those dollars to get to a place to make this stuff happen. Otherwise, we can't sustain it. But I also think that to put all of our eggs in one basket around incentive pay is a dangerous thing, because I think there are a number of other reasons why teachers teach in hard to teach schools and in challenging districts and in areas and stay in the profession. So I think coupled with multiple, I'm going to use a term that I've become very fond of lately, multiple measures, multiple activities aimed at trying to incentivize teachers and reward teachers, both with those non-fiscal aspects as well as the fiscal aspects. So it plays a big part, but I think it's also one piece of many pieces that we have to figure out how to get right.
I'm Kimberly Fundino. I'm a teacher. I'm half-time teacher, half-time educator from Oregon.
Okay.
And
that was in Portland not long ago. One of the most beautiful cities I've ever been in my life.
Thank you very much. We like it. I guess I had a huge aha while you were speaking, and when it came to me, and it goes with the merit pay conversation, and it seems to me that the conversation around test scores, it should be a conversation with those teachers. Look at your kids. What are those test scores? What's going on? But the evaluation should be around what do they do about it.
Exactly. And that's what we've not done well. We have had data. In Tennessee, we've had data for years. We've never done anything with it. We've never asked the question, what then? We've never been able to look at those teachers in Hancock County who may not have many people to fall back on to try to help figure out how to teach linear algebra when they've done everything they know to do. We've not answered the question of what then. And a lot of the effort in our Race to Top application, and I think we have to focus on going forward, is building that community of learning that allows folks to know what the what then question and to use that data. I think you're exactly right, and I think it also has to be based on multiple measures. I think there has to be not just looking at the data. The data is critically important, but especially if we're going to continue to use summative assessments. If we're going to use formative assessments and benchmarks and interims so that we can make some mid-course corrections going forward, I think the data becomes a bigger piece of the puzzle. But when we're looking at summative, we've got to figure out what all those other pieces are that fit in and then help build that culture of learning. Because I'm going to tell you, my experience in as a building administrator, we had all the drive-by in service and all the professional development in the world. The single greatest result that we ever got was bringing all the fifth grade teachers together to figure out what the math problem was and letting them collectively share that wisdom and go forth and teach. And they became the highest performing math grade in the school. So I think that's, you're spot on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kurt Scheib, and I'm a PhD student here at Vanderbilt. And I'd like to ask you what your opinion is of the role of pre-K in all of this, because we've often talked about K through 12, but yet there's a school readiness piece to that. So I'm wondering, with all the debate and conversation going on around pre-K, what your thoughts are.
Well, since I work for Governor Bredesen, I'm a huge fan of pre-K. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a huge fan of pre-K anyway, especially in the world in which we live today, when there are so many single-parent homes and there's so many children who don't have the benefit of somebody having a child in their lap, reading to them, reading with them, engaging in conversation, and kids are just trying to be raised by technology at this point in many cases. I think the pre-K program, to level the playing field, is absolutely paramount. I think we have not done a good job trying to figure out what the long-term effects of pre-K would be. We get a lot of stuff where folks say, it wanes by third grade. You start to see the waning benefit of pre-K and that investment early, third, fourth, fifth grade. I don't think we've done a good enough job. First of all, it's fairly early in its existence. I don't think we've done a good job trying to figure out what that looks like. But I also know that without it, many of the children who come to kindergarten now, we have about 17,000, 18,000 students in pre-K in Tennessee right now. We've grown that from about, we had 134 programs. We now have 984 programs across the state. Every county has a pre-K program in it. I think that level of readiness to come into that kindergarten environment has been enhanced tremendously. And I think we need to continue to try to grow it out. I think it's viable. It's a very viable asset, and I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to do the kinds of research that tell us what's really working and what's not working, and also to practice selective abandonment when it's not working. But I really believe strongly in the readiness level that pre-K, particularly for at-risk students, is having on our populations.
Well, since my name is Nakia Towns, and I'm from Knox County Schools, from
Hey,
Knoxville,
Nakia.
but I'm not Don.
Thank you, Nikita.
Yes.
I hope I meet him someday. 'Cause he's a really good guy.
But my question, since we, the pre-K question kicked this off, on the other end of the spectrum, since you talked about college and career ready, are there plans for the state to help us with data to track what happens to our graduates after they leave our school system, and will that be a part of the accountability metrics?
I'm not sure that it'll be a part of the accountability metric because that's going to take a different conversation. I will say this. There's a scaffolding effect going on right now. Obviously we have the value add data and this longitudinal data system that we've had since '92 that we've not really used very well. We have that academic data. We also have the education information system, which is has been traditionally the operational data store, but it's also more of a data warehousing type activity. Short answer is we're building out and enhancing our P12 system and interfacing that back out to teachers and educators across the state to make this 360-degree view of a child possible, as well as an early warning system possible. At the same time, we're working with Dr. Fox and the folks at the Center for Business and Economic Research at UT Knoxville, to build a P20 system. The P12 system will feed it, but the P20 system is more of an archival system that will allow us to look at college going, college success, military, labor workforce development, economic community development, all those kinds of pieces, and at the same time, turn data back to those institutions of higher education that train teachers so that we can begin to look at how well their graduates are performing, their graduate students are performing over time. So the short answer to your question is absolutely. We're building that now. We will be turning out the interface to teachers sometime in late spring on the P12 system. And the P20 system is being worked with higher ed, Dr. Fox, and our system, as well as the other agencies. And that's where those data sharing agreements I talked about a moment ago are really taking place. So it's, a great question, and it's there. Accountability, yeah, I would love to, but we're going to have to try to drive that conversation a little later.
Hi, Denise Miller. I'm a student here at Vanderbilt. I was at a meeting on Saturday, and two students were talking. And one of them was from Memphis, and one of them was here from Nashville. And they said, there are so many tests, and I don't know what the point of them is. I know what the point is of the SATs, but usually they're administered after breakfast, and sometimes we just fill in the bubbles and make pictures and things like that. And one of my concerns is, what are the student perceptions of tests, and how do the teachers translate the meaning of tests, and is there any sort of systematic plan to sort of communicate the purpose of all the assessments?
We have almost all of our professional development money that's inside of this application is focused on training teachers on the utilization of data and on the utilization of formative assessments, if you will, and then answering that what-if question that was asked a minute ago. So at the teacher level, a tremendous amount of investment going into that piece around but moving away from this autopsy test, this summative test that we don't get back until after this kid's already gone. It's too late to do anything with it. So yes, that's happening. The other piece is that in Tennessee we just passed a law, good, bad, or ugly. We just passed a law, and by the way, I support it completely for 3 more months. That says that part of the student grade will be determined by their performance on these assessments. To try to get at this issue of stopping this bubble coloring thing, creating Christmas trees out of the test documents. So making sure that they have some skin in the game. Our next big horizon is how do we get that parent engagement at that same level, right? So that's the big challenge for us now, is try to figure out how we work with opportunities like America's Promise and others, Grad Nation and other activities across the country to really rein parents into the conversation much more than we ever have.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Webb, I'm Susan Burns, and I work at the National Center on Performance Incentives. And I apologize if you have talked about this already, but I would like for you, if you don't mind, to mention a little more directly the work of the Education Delivery Unit. I think that's a new concept for most people, and it would be interesting for people to hear about it.
The Education Delivery Unit really it gets at this whole issue of delivery. The Education Delivery Unit was started by Tony Blair in the UK and a guy by the name of Sir Michael Barber, who actually was the Education Delivery Unit director, if you will, for Tony Blair. And it was all focused on making sure that we were able to carry out all the things that we said, delivering on the promise and on the promises. In the UK, it was getting the trains to run on time and all those kinds of things. Here, it's aimed at making sure that all the things that are inside of our race to the top, this culture of performance, all those things get delivered. And there's a special unit that's set up in our agency that reports directly to the commissioner. It has no line management responsibility whatsoever. But their job, and it's 3 or 4 people, their job is strictly to look at goals and objectives and targets and make sure that we're making progress all the way, and that they're also looking at the delivery chain. Whether that chain starts at USAID or it starts at the SEA and it goes to the classroom, and where there are weak links along that chain and how we're shoring up those weak links and making sure that we're not dropping the ball somewhere along the way. So the Education Delivery Unit is a special unit whose job is to make sure that we meet our benchmarks and our target, and to do those kinds of things that we talked about early on, asking those hard questions, that gentle pressure, challenging when things need to be challenged. But they don't have any responsibility for leading troops. Their job is to make sure that we're meeting the objective and identifying any challenges along the way. Good. Thank you all so very, very much for what you do every day. Whether you want to believe it or not, you're the heroes of this great nation, and you are the first line of defense. So thank you so much, and we appreciate you, and God bless you. Hope you have a good conference.